You already know what a bear is. You know the shape of the thing, the slouch, the bulk, the way it moves like it has somewhere else to be but no particular hurry. You know the hierarchy in your mind. Grizzly at the top, polar bear second, and then somewhere beneath those, a whole category of smaller, less threatening cousins. The sun bear lives in that category. You have seen it, or something like it, on a nature channel, in a zoo, in the background of someone else's documentary about orangutans. Small, Southeast Asian, black-furred with that strange gold patch on its chest, like a spilled cup of tea. You probably thought, harmless. You probably thought, cute. That familiarity is exactly what makes you unprepared.
Because the sun bear, Helarctos malayanus, has been quietly mistaken for a novelty item for over a century. Illustrated on children's puzzles, photographed next to zoo visitors, misnamed as honey bears, tree bears, dog bears, as though it required domesticating language before it could be properly seen. What the language hid, what the soft nomenclature buried, was the fact that pound for pound, the sun bear is the most efficiently violent land predator you are likely to encounter in Southeast Asia. Not the most dangerous, the most efficient. There is a difference. And by the end of this, you will understand it. Because the sun bear, Helarctos malayanus, has been quietly mistaken for a novelty item for over a century. Illustrated on children's puzzles, photographed next to zoo visitors, misnamed as honey bears, tree bears, dog bears, as though it required domesticating language before it could be properly seen. What the language hid, what the soft nomenclature buried, was the fact that pound for pound, the sun bear is the most efficiently violent land predator you are likely to encounter in Southeast Asia. Not the most dangerous, the most efficient. There is a difference. And by the end of this, you will understand it.
The claws, 3 to 4 centimeters long, sharply hooked, not for combat, for climbing. Sun bears are the most arboreal of all bears, spending substantial parts of their lives in the forest canopy, and the claw structure reflects this. But what evolved for tree bark translates, in encounters with soft tissue, into something else entirely. The bite force of the sun bear has been measured at 257 newtons per square centimetre, disproportionately high relative to skull size, higher than any comparably sized mammal in its range, optimized for cracking open ironwood and termite colonies. In 2011, a paper in Ursus, authored by Wong Siu Tae, described jaw muscle mass ratios in the sun bear that exceed those of the American black bear at comparable body weights. And then there is the skin, loose, extraordinarily loose, a feature so anatomically unusual that researchers who first documented it use the word remarkable in their literature, a word scientists deploy sparingly. The skin around the sun bear's neck is so slack that when a predator grabs it, the bear can rotate almost completely within its own hide. It can turn inside its own skin to bite whatever is holding it. This is not metaphor. This is documented behavior. A 2019 analysis in Zoomorphology described the cervical dermal layer as functionally analogous to a defensive rotation joint, skin as pivot. You grab it, it turns around, and it finds you. On the 21st of March 2023, a woman named Wu Hart, a zookeeper at the Hangzhou Zoo in Zhejiang Province, China, entered an enclosure to feed a sun bear named Angela. The bear attacked without warning, without provocation, without the telegraphed behavioral signals that trained keepers learn to read. Wu sustained injuries to her arm before colleagues could intervene. She survived. The incident was documented by zoo surveillance cameras and the footage circulated internationally.
Not because it was especially dramatic by the standards of large predator encounters, but because of what happened to the internet's response to it. People laughed.
The video was widely shared as comedy. The bear in the footage looks odd, animated, almost human-like in the upright posture sun bears naturally adopt. Commenters called it a man in a suit. They made memes. Hangzhou Zoo, to its apparent embarrassment, issued a formal statement clarifying that Angela was, in fact, a real sun bear, not a costumed employee. The statement circulated wider than the injury report. A zoo worker had been hurt. The story that travelled was about a funny bear that looked fake. This is not incidental. This is the case study in miniature. The sun bear is so visually improbable, so unlike the template we carry in our minds for what dangerous animals look like, that even documented attacks fail to register as dangerous. The cognitive machinery that should produce fear produces, instead, a joke. We are not uninformed about sun bears. We are recalibrated against alarm. Evolution designed them to be underestimated. We obliged.
The intelligence of sun bears is the chapter the documentaries skip. In 2023, a landmark study published in Scientific Reports by Derry Taylor and colleagues at the University of Exeter documented what researchers described as spontaneous facial mimicry in sun bears, a behaviour previously associated only with highly social primates and dogs. When two sun bears interacted, they produced matching facial expressions within 500 milliseconds of each other. Open-mouth displays were returned with open-mouth displays. The synchronization was too precise and too rapid to be coincidence. Spontaneous facial mimicry is understood, in the literature, as a building block of empathy, of social bonding, of the capacity to model another creature's internal state. Sun bears live largely solitary lives. They have no obvious evolutionary pressure requiring social facial communication. They do it anyway. What this means, structurally, is that the sun bear carries cognitive architecture that exceeds its ecological context, a social brain in a solitary animal. The same study noted that sun bears showed this mimicry preferentially with familiar individuals, suggesting not just reflex, but recognition, memory, preference, a sense of who is who. This is not a bear that responds to stimuli. This is a bear that remembers your face. Consider what that means in the context of a keeper who works the same enclosure every day, of a wildlife researcher who returns to the same forest territory for 6 seasons. The sun bear is not perceiving you as a generic threat to be assessed and dismissed. It is building a record. It is updating that record. And, here is the part that should stay with you, it does this automatically, involuntarily, the way we do, the way we cannot help but do, the way evolution scripted it into our faces before we had language for it. The sun bear does not need language for it either. There is a word in the literature on sun bear conservation that appears with uncomfortable regularity. The word is perceived. Sun bears are perceived as low priority, perceived as less charismatic than tigers, perceived as less endangered than orangutans, less symbolically loaded than elephants, less cinematically useful than the great apes. The IUCN lists Halarctos malayanus as vulnerable, a category that contains multitudes, a category that means we noticed before it was too late, but have not yet acted in time. The primary driver of sun bear decline is deforestation, specifically palm oil agriculture. The lowland dipterocarp forests of Borneo and Sumatra, the ecosystems sun bears evolved for, the only habitat complex that sustains their diet, their arboreal life history, their extraordinary ecology, have been reduced by more than 50% since 1985. A 2020 assessment in biological conservation estimated that sun bear range has contracted by 49% in the last 3 generations. The sun bear, by the metric of its own survival, is not doing well. But here is the irony that should sit inside you like a stone. The traits we dismiss as novelty, the human-like posture, the loose skin, the gold chest patch, the strange, expressive face, are the very traits that make the sun bear a keystone species in ways ecologists are only beginning to document.
Sun bears are the primary excavators of forest floors in large parts of Southeast Asia. They tear into dead wood for insects, and in doing so, they aerate soil, distribute fungi, create microhabitats for species that cannot exist without them. They regulate termite populations at scales that affect forest health systemically. Remove the sun bear from a forest, and the forest does not simply lose a predator, it loses an engineer. We have spent a century underestimating what it builds, and now we are watching what happens when it stops.
Here is a particular behaviour that sun bear researchers use to close their papers, their lectures, their grant applications. They describe it carefully, because it is the behaviour that, once understood, makes the politics and the dismissal and the memes feel like a specific kind of tragedy. When a sun bear investigates something new, a scent, a sound, a change in the forest, it stands upright. Not to attack, not to flee. It stands to see. It rotates within that extraordinary skin, orients its face, and looks. The posture is so human that zoogoers have mistaken it for performance, for costume, for trick. It is not a trick. It is an animal that evolved, in the same slow centuries we did, to stand upright and look at the world and try to understand what it is looking at. The gold patch on its chest, which gave it the name, that burning sun, faces outward when it stands. Visible, luminous. A thing that could be a warning or a greeting, or simply a mark that says, I was here. I am here. Look at me. We looked. We laughed. We took photographs, and somewhere in the contracting forest, a bear that remembers faces is still standing.